Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived?
Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Did you hear what Haile Selassie said? Could you tell that Haile Selassie was blessed? Did you see how Haile Selassie dressed? Could you tell that Haile Selassie was... Did they prove that Haile Selassie is dead? Now they don't know Haile Selassie is dread. He was a real man, not a dream. The king of kings with the queen. First African on Time magazine. No one else in the world ain't seen what he's seen. Walked in his footsteps or been where he's been. He walked with the poor and watered the green. He fought on the field with the rest of the team. Got burnt by the gas that was dropped from the plane. Didn't have time to cry about pain. Just had to get up and move on again. Work in the sun and work in the rain. Just work for the people, never in vain. He stayed humble, never complained. Stayed faithful even when his youth got slain. From day one he ran a righteous campaign. The most regal no matter what the weak can't claim. Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Did you hear what Haile Selassie said? Did you see how Haile Selassie dressed? Could you tell that Haile Selassie was blessed? Did they prove that Haile Selassie is dead? Now they don't know Haile Selassie is dread. Man of the millennium, world's best dressed. First colour picture ever impressed. Fresh and clean, forever impressed. First emperor crowned next to his empress. The first Haile Selassie to sit down on the throne of Menelik. The first emperor in Africa to have a true constitution writ. Just imagine it for a minute, then sit for a minute, then think. Why didn't no one tell you nothing about him? H-I-M. That's the reason that I raised my pen. Peter told him, let me tell them again. I know he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the Savior with a new name. Just like a thief in the night, he passed through and overcame. Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Did you hear what Haile Selassie said? Did you see how Haile Selassie dressed? Could you tell that Haile Selassie was blessed? Did they prove that Haile Selassie is dead? Now they don't know Haile Selassie is dread. Root of Ori, people of the book. Seed of Solomon, root of Cush. Throne of David, key to the ark. 9 warriors beat to the heart. Nothing like Caesar, elect of Jah. Prince of peace, Lion of Judah. Shepherd of sheep. Founder of the OAU, that's deep. Father of Africa is he. He was greeted by John F. Kennedy, and he said something that you should read. Bring these foods or feed that need. Highly conquered anger and greed. Conquering lion indeed, both arms stretched out for the ones in need. If we follow his way, then we will succeed, so do it with speed.
Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived?
Yo, bless me.
Human frailty is reducing the power of my voice to be heard. My father first went to Ethiopia in 1907. He was at that time stationed in the British military at Aden, and his brother worked in the Sudan. And being a simple-minded fellow, he took a ruler and worked out that the shortest way to get to visit his brother was walk across Ethiopia. And walk across it was, because by that time the railway had barely yet reached Diridar, and he had to rely on camels up as far as Addis Ababa and mules beyond Addis Ababa to complete his journey. He then came back to Ethiopia as British Vice Consul in 1910 until 1913. He then went back to the World War and fought in it, and came back to Ethiopia in 1919 to work in various private enterprises, most of which were singularly unsuccessful. But one of the things he did was become a correspondent of the Daily Mail newspaper, I think, and he was used by Haile Selassie as a way of getting a better audience and a better image for Ethiopia in the British press. When the Italians started to show signs of invading in 1935, Haile Selassie told my father the most useful thing he could do would be to go down to Marji and help the governor there in suppressing and cooperating with the British over the suppression of the slave trade. Marji is not particularly easy to get to at the moment, but in those days it took 6 weeks. We then left Ethiopia because of the Italian invasion. I claim that I'm one of the first political exiles, and I left at the age of 6 months. My father then spent a miserable time trying to find work in England, but finally joined the British military intelligence in the Middle East when it became clear that Italy was about to join Germany in the war against Britain. My father then spent his time next year trying to persuade various British colonies round Ethiopia that backing Haile Selassie was the simplest thing to do to help Britain succeed in the war. My father then led a mission, while the Italians were still in control of Ethiopia, led a mission with the Jesuit Summer to go to the various patriots over Gojam and say to them, Haile Selassie is about to come back. He's going to have the British this time helping him, and now you need to make your contacts with him and receive your instructions from him. And he spent 6 months in Ethiopia before Haile Selassie returned. He was then appointed chief political and military advisor for Haile Selassie and spent the next 2 years in helping Haile Selassie re-establish his rule. He was called British military and political advisor, and there was at that time considerable tension between the British colonies and the British home government about what should be done about Ethiopia. The colonies said, we've helped them get independence, we will now instruct them as a protectorate of Britain to behave properly and develop the right way. And Haile Selassie strongly resisted this and was helped by my father. He then spent 2 years in the Ministry of the Interior as Director General and advisor there in helping to re-establish the provincial administrations. In 1946 he ceased to work in the private office of the Emperor and became Director General and advisor to the Kantiba of Addis Ababa, who was the judgment covered at summer again. But he spent the last 3 years of his working life in this executive role in the municipality of Addis Ababa. I shook Haile Selassie's hands twice, once at the age of 7 when he was passing and recognised my father, and once at the age of 47 when my father died and Haile Selassie came to his funeral, breaking off a visit to Nigeria so that he could get back in time for my father's funeral. The other members of my family have also been active in Ethiopia. My mother wrote 2 books, one on Ethiopia and on Haile Selassie, and the other called The Lion of Judah Has Prevailed, which is the biography of Haile Selassie. Myself, my brother and my daughter have all worked in Ethiopia in agriculture, and my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, was for 10-15 years director of the Sanford English School, and he was succeeded after a break by my wife, who spent 6 years also as director of the English School. So this is a personal recollection of Ethiopia.
Good evening. My name is Angela Raven Roberts. I'm currently a research associate at the International Gender Studies Center here in Oxford University.
What just happened today? What was the event?
Today we've just completed an event on the legacies of Haile Selassie. It was an event as part of what in England takes place every year. Every October is Black History Month or African History Month. The idea being that Africans and the diaspora in Britain remember the history, and we commemorate the history and the contributions of people of African descent in Britain. And we also learn more about the history of Africa and the African diaspora globally and in general. We wanted to use the occasion of the visit of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, who came to Oxford after the liberation of Ethiopia in 1954, when he was embarking on a tour of the world as part of his getting more allies to modernize Ethiopia and rebuild Ethiopia after the war. He came to Britain on a state visit, and part of his visit, he came to Oxford University, where he was given an honorary degree. And he visited New College, which is one of the oldest colleges in Oxford. He went to Christ Church, Oriel. There was a big procession, and he went to the Sheldonian and was given an honorary degree there. Then he visited the Bodleian Library to look at the ancient manuscripts, some ancient manuscripts, Ethiopian manuscripts that they have there. We thought this was a great occasion to look at the legacies of Haile Selassie, both in Ethiopia, what he did, what he implemented, what he initiated, but also Haile Selassie is a global figure. All the movements that were inspired by him, Pan-African movement, Black consciousness, the Rastafarian movement, and all of the various ways in which Haile Selassie put Ethiopia in the global world community as a founder of the League of Nations, founder of the United Nations, all of these where Ethiopia still plays a prominent part. So this conference we had was to bring together diverse academics, people who know Ethiopia, who worked in Ethiopia, who studied Ethiopia, Ethiopians who live in Oxford, Ethiopian students from Oxford, and everybody, the community, the Betasab, Ethiopian Miwadna community, to discuss these and to celebrate and commemorate this event. So this is what's just finished.
Thank you very much. And do you have any such plan in the future?
We are hoping to make this a national event within Britain, because as everybody knows, Haile Selassie stayed in Britain in the 1930s in Bath, and he had his own home in Fairfield House. But also, when he came to Britain back in 1954, he went to other parts of Britain. And so we want to use that to spread the word and do similar events to reach other parts of Britain. So people in Britain, and also the young generation of Ethiopians who are growing up here, and the British people, can really know what were the connections between Britain and Ethiopia, who was Haile Selassie, and most of all, to understand Ethiopia in its really long history and its diverse communities, and the fact that Ethiopia was really part of the first world, not the third world, or the second, or the fourth, but the first. Our civilization, our history, all of us, is very linked. We want people of Britain to understand this, and that African history is as important as their own history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you a question in Amharic?
Okay, you can try it.
ጤና ይስጥልኝ የኔ እመቤት። ስምዎትን ቢያስተዋውቁኝ?
እሺ፣ ስሜ ሙሉ ስሜ አንጀላ ክርስቲና ፀሐይ ሬቨን ሮበርትስ ነው። ፀሐይ የተሰጠኝ ስም የኔ ክርስትና እናት ልዕልት ልሩት ደስታ ነበሩ እና የእሳቸውን ታላቅ ለማክበር በክርስትና ስነሳ እሱን ስም ሰጡኝ እና እነዛ ነው ክርስትና የተነሳ። ክርስቲና ደግሞ የእናቴ ስም ነው። ስለዚህ ሁሉም አንድ ላይ ይሄ ነው ስሜ።
ኢትዮጵያ ኖረዋል ማለት ነው?
አዎ፣ እዛ ነው ያደግኩት ከእድሜ 2 ወር እስከ 16 እዛ ትምህርት ቤት 11ኛ ክፍል ጨርሼ እንግሊዝ ሀገር መጣሁ፣ ተማርኩኝ፣ ኦክስፎርድ ተማርኩኝ፣ ለንደን ዩኒቨርሲቲ ሰዋስ የሚባል አፍሪካን ሂስትሪ የሚያስተምር እዛም ተምሬያለሁ እና አሜሪካን ሀገር ደግሞ ፒኤችዲ እዛ ነው የጨረስኩኝ እና ኢትዮጵያም ተመልሻለሁ እና ብዙ አመት አልፎ አልፎ ሰርቻለሁ ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ እና አሁንም እመላለሳለሁ ለስራ ጥናት እና ለጉብኝነት እና ሽሮና ትዝታ ሲነካኝ ወደ አዲስ አበባ ነው የምመጣ።
ሌላው ልጠይቆት መጨረሻ ነው የምጠይቆት የኔም ቤት ይሄንን ያዘጋጁትን ዝግጅት እንደኔ ያሉ ኢትዮጵያውያን ተማሪዎች ምን ያገኙበታል፣ ምን ይማሩበታል ብለው?
እሺ እንግዲህ ኢትዮጵያ ተማሪ ጎበዝ ተማሪ ነው እና ብዙ ነገር ያውቃል እና እኛ ያሰብነው አንደኛ የዝም ሀገር ተማሪ እዚህ ያደጉት ድንገት ምን ግንኙነት ነው ያለው ከእንግሊዝ ሀገር እና ከኢትዮጵያ ጋር ይሄንን እንዲያውቁ። ለምንድን ነው ኢትዮጵያ ሁሉ ሰው የውጭ ሀገር ዜጋ ለምንድን ነው የሚወዳት? ምንድን ነው ታሪኩ? ምንድን ነው ግንኙነታቸው? ይሄንን እንዲያውቁ እና የኛ ውጭ ሀገር ሆነ ኢትዮጵያንን ብናፈቅረው እንዲያውቁ እና እነሱም እንዲያፈቅሩ። ለምን ኢትዮጵያ በዓለም ላይ በጣም ትልቅ ታሪክ ያላት ሀገር እና በጣም አፕሪሺየት የሆነች ሀገር እና ይሄንን እኛም እንደምንወዳት እናንተም እስቲ እንደገና ውደዷት እና በቃ ሞራል ሁሉ የእኛንም ሞራል እና የሁሉንም ሞራል ለማንሳት ዋናው ምክንያት።
የሰጡኝ ጊዜ በጣም አመሰግናለሁ። ወደፊት እንደምንገናኝ ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ።
እሺ፣ አመሰግናለሁ።
የማንነታችን መለያ የሆኑት ዓለም ያስደመሙ የችሎታ ውጤት የአክሱምን ሐውልት፣ የላሊበላ ውቅር ቤተ ክርስቲያናት፣ ቴዎድሮስ መቅደላ ሕይወቱን የሰጣት ለወራሪ ጠላት ባልገብር ባይነት የተቆረጠውን የዮሐንስ አንገት፣ የአጼ ምኒልክን ጥበብ የሞላበት አሸናፊ መሆን ባድዋ ጦርነት፣ የግርማዊ ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴን በጀኔቭ ከተማ ቃል በማያከብሩ ባለም መንግስታት ፊት በፋሽስት ወኪሎች ድርፋታና ጩኸት ሳይደናገጡ ሰሚ ባይገኝም ጉዳይን ማስረዳት፣ በመጨረሻውም ማስመለስ ነፃነት፣ ከቅኝ ገዢ ጋር በመፋለም ላሉ ነፃነት ተጋፊ አበረታች፣ የአፍሪካ አንድነትን መንገድ መሪ ከፋች፣ ዓለም ምስክር ነው ኢትዮጵያ እንደሆነች። ይህን ሁሉ ውጤት ባንክሮ ብናየው የዘውዱ ስርዓት የታሪክ ድርሻ አለው። ባለቤቱ አቅልሎ በውል ባይዘውም እንደ ሰው ተሰዶ በአገሩ ባይኖርም በጥቁር ዓለም ውስጥ በአሜሪካ አውሮፓም አለው ብዙ አስታዋሽ አለው ብዙ አክባሪ አስታዋሽ አላጣም። ተረት አልነው እውነት አመን አላመን ነው ትናንት እንደነበር ነገም ተነገ ወዲያም ጥፋቱም ልማቱም ሲዘከር ይኖራል ስራው ምስክር ነው።
Because if all the books in the world were written about His Majesty, there wouldn't be space in the world for them. You know, he had done so many things, not just in Ethiopia, but even more so in the world at large. And to conquer fascism means that this is the devil that wants to perhaps install the right of might, whatever it be, against righteousness. And that was the great fight, the great war that went on between Italy and Ethiopia. And of course His Majesty won, plain and simple, end of story. He sat in Bath and he negotiated how to win that war that was so inequitable, the most uneven war that was ever fought upon the earth. Italy armed to the teeth, as we know, with munitions and armaments, etc., and Ethiopians with weapons that were from a former century, spears, bows and arrows, fighting against aeroplanes that were sending them poison gas, bombs, etc., on Ethiopian soil, trying to end the 3,000-year dynasty that was Solomonic. And as Rastafari in the Caribbean, we picked up the rumors of that war. And in 1930, of course, in the Caribbean, we said, we are the warriors fighting for King Negus. We are on his throne. Even though we were thousands of miles away, our elders and our grassroots scholars saw him through the eyes of the Bible, in which he himself is glorified, and said yes. And we gave ourselves a new name and a new identity from the colonial Caribbean, where we had been thrown underfoot, sent from Africa into that deep basin, the pit of hell, as it were. Having overcome the slave master, we were still in chains as Rastafari. We dared to defy the colonizers and say, we will not bow to you. As a matter of fact, we have a king in Ethiopia. We will refuse to pay taxes to King George upon the throne, or whoever is upon that throne. We will bow to His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. So our exhibition was...
And this painting is in the National Library of Ethiopia, and these details are from the book The National Archives and Library of Ethiopia, 6 Years of Ethio-French Cooperation. In the centre sits enthroned Haile Selassie, wearing a crown and holding a sceptre and imperial globe, with 3 lions at his feet and the Trinity Church in the background. Allegorical scenes are depicted all around. At the left of the emperor, one can see dead bodies of traditional warriors, women and children fleeing in terror, a column of horsemen holding spears and small tanks on the top of the hill. Two statuesque women holding books but not reading mourn and condemn this scene. Between sky and earth, heavy blackbirds glide over this desolation. At the right of the emperor, one can see in the background women running to exalt khaki-dressed soldiers marching in column, while huge tanks stand in the background and proud planes protect the army. In the foreground, children have stopped their games for reading amid peaceful scenery. 2 allegoric female figures symbolize justice and veneration for the emperor. All this happens on earth. In the heavy, cloudy sky, winged demons fight against archangels, and 4 horsemen gallop to the cardinal points, referring clearly to apocalypse of Revelation. This very symbolic painting could be a representation of the final battle in heaven, leading to the advent of the Messiah, incarnated here as the Ethiopian emperor. The political meaning of the whole, in relation to the National Library, could be a praise of modernization and enlightenment, and a condemnation of the kind of backwardness which would not allow Ethiopia to stand on equal footing with the industrialized countries. Books and education are here compared to weapons and are designated as one of the main strengths of the nation. The painter was Beatrix Plain, a British artist who lived in Ethiopia at the end of 1940s and the beginning of the 1950s. In her book on Ethiopian church paintings, she introduced herself saying that she had learned mural painting in Mexico, and that she arrived in Ethiopia as a British council worker on December 1945, and that she was engaged on some extremely special work in the National Library in Addis Ababa very shortly after her arrival. The emperor cared enough about the mural to later have it rendered slightly by an Ethiopian artist. Around the time of the coronation, pictures like with allegorical scenes from the Bible were not uncommon, and this painting celebrates the coronation of the emperor. However, it's in the style of the European depictions of the Last Supper, with animals instead of biblical figures. The emperor is the lion in the centre of the picture. This is in the British Museum. And during the war, a lot was said about Haile Selassie and how he acted, and this is some information I found about the emperor's conduct during the war. There's this from Werner Brogel, Ethiopian Italian war correspondent. The bombs all fell a few meters around the building to the ground. The house itself, where the Negus, with the Crown Prince and Prince Makonnen was located, was miraculously intact. And therefore that the emperor did not go into any shelter during the bombing, and that he is deemed to be immune to Italian bombs, he is revered by thousands of his subjects as a true deity. A bottle was dropped by one of the planes. It contained a note, scrawled in pencil. Long live Italy. We carry with us the civilization of Rome. Greetings to the Negus. Ask him if he has digested his biscuits. A few hours later, the emperor collected all of the biscuits which had not exploded and piled them up in front of his house. Setting his foot on one of the biggest, he was photographed by a nervous press. They thought of time fuses and used their fastest exposures. When they had gone, he settled down happily to weighing and measuring the bombs, investigating their contents, and precisely recording all of the results in his notebook. The bomb holes were measured and details were collected about a range of various shell bursts. And this is from George Steer, previously of Oxford University. The bombardment of that day killed several and wounded many, who were thought to be in front of the Emperor's cave. Why, one might ask, there? Already there was continual traffic along the narrow path. It was crowded with people. They were taken to the cave because the emperor is the centre which all Ethiopians unconsciously direct themselves. The wounded in their dirty clothes were laid almost in spite of themselves before the entrance of the cave, while an Ethiopian doctor rendered first aid. As far as the emperor himself was concerned, his conduct during the offensive was irreproachable. He was always in the zone of artillery fire and continuously exposed himself to danger. In the end, he went down into the plain and machine-gunned the enemy himself with terrific effect. During the war, the Italians, they like to say that the emperor was dead. They dropped leaflets saying the emperor's dead. They said that the emperor has prepared all these places that he's fleeing to, and every different edict that they made leaflet they dropped seemed to be a different place. Really a lot was said, and then the emperor went into exile. Of course, a council of ministers and great men of Ethiopia came together and voted the emperor to go into exile. And even at the last moment, George Steer writes that he saw, through a crack of a door, the emperor reasoning with Empress Menin, saying that he wanted to fight on, and Empress Menin was saying, no, it's time to go, and people have voted for you.
Within a week, word came from the bishop's house. The emperor is at his court tomorrow. He will see you. She hardly knew how they got there, hardly knew how they passed through the blur of uniforms and capes, gardens and crested archways, up steps, along cool hall. A large room, and at its far end a small figure. How small? Standing. Head almost too big for narrow shoulders. A long flared nose. A wide brow scrawled with lines, sunken cheeks. Did he not sleep properly or eat? Instantly she directed her eyes downwards, at the carpet, at her head and all her body bowing to him. When she was told to speak, she did so without looking up. His voice, when at long last it came, had a shredded quality. It was as non-committal as his bearing. Let him come here. We will hear the case. For various reasons, and it was a plot. There is a kind of plot. I'm not going to give away the plot. That doesn't really happen. So she has to do some more petitioning. Now, I am aware that lots of people will probably know a great deal more about this than I do. So I'm going to see if there's any questions after I've done any reading, done my reading, just to give you a heads up. She heard shouts before she saw anything, shouts and stuttering engines. There seemed suddenly to be more people, some craning their necks, others being pushed back by figures she couldn't see, and she was caught in among them. Her nose filled with their various smells, dust, old sweat, butter, bruised roux. They were too close, too close. Abid. She knew what this was. A gap opened up in front of her and she pushed forward. She was part of a wall of people now, facing another wall, in between them, clear road. The low, dark car turned into the space, creeping, almost silent, helmeted policemen running alongside. Abid! People began to reach out towards the vehicle, in each hand a piece of paper, held aloft like a flag. Choose me! The car slid through the paper forest and slowed. Then the first person broke through the wall, dragged the shama from around his shoulders, threw it down in front of the car. Another followed and another, calling in the way petitioners had called out to their emperors for centuries, around tents pitched on the northern plains and in the southern depressions, through royal enclosures at Ankara, at Kuspam, at Gondar, on hunting trips, at parades, at play or at war, stripping off clothing, knowing that the contract between sovereign and people was that no emperor could travel over garments laid down in his power. The car stopped, the window was rolled down. There was that long nose again. Abid! The emperor reached out and took some of the pieces of paper. The window was wound up again, and the car moved off. That worked eventually, although she did, Haile didn't answer. She petitioned and she waited at the gates of the palace for years. She turned up and she tried to give her petition in. And she would wait every morning because that was almost like it was a job. But eventually it worked. Again, she hardly remembered later how she got up the steps, how she crossed the hall, how long she waited, if she did, before she was ushered in, what the room looked like, who was there, apart from him, of course. He was standing before his throne. She bowed deep. He was King of Kings, elect of God. But as she had sometimes tried to remind herself over the long months, human too, with his own sadnesses. Lord Raskasa, who had been at the Emperor's side for 40 years, advising, offering steadfast friendship, had died just a year before. Haile Selassie had already lost 3 of his 4 daughters to childbirth and to illness, one of them in Italian captivity. A few months ago, his son, chosen many said, for succession, had died in a car crash. Your Majesty, my husband is dead. He cried out that he was burning, that he was being scorched from within. He died a terrible, secret death. No reply. Then a slight movement. She raised her eyes from the floor towards the Emperor's chest. It was his index finger that had moved and was now pointing at the gilded ceiling. Tell that to him. I sat down instantly to hide the gulfs of disappointment breaking open within her. Yes, Banbury. Is there anything else? My enemies have taken my land, they've taken my trees. That is a matter for the church authorities. Then in a rush, in a bid to make him a man, a father, the same age now as her husband would have been had he lived, to make him consider, to make him consider what her husband's death had been like. I have given birth to many children. They are scattered across his ashes. They shall go to boarding school. Yes, John. Then she was being ushered out, bowing, being handed what? A few money for the journey. What journey? Laughing too loud, remembering it years later. So those were, they were high points in her life. They were also obviously moments of great stress, but they were one of the things that she said to me was, and I had to work quite hard to translate it, because it's the word gamambe, it's his dignity, how it encompassed everything, and how that was all that the room contained, and how hard it was to speak in those moments. So I think I've done 10 minutes. Because I've realised that it's all very tightly timed. And I just wondered if anybody had any questions. I'll attempt to answer them if I can.
Cressida Marcus, I've just got back from Ethiopia, and I want you to know that women who also went to the boarding schools that I know are reading your biopic. So it is getting to Ethiopia, people are reading it. And I want to also say that it's a wonderful account. I work in Gondar myself, and I know Ba'ata, Mariam, and I know the Queen, and I know that you mentioned. And this is a beautiful reconstruction of the Ethiopia that's really disappeared since the urban expansion in Ethiopia, the smell of the earth, the smell of the butter, etc., etc. My question to you is, in terms of the Aluka, do you think that his juridical status, his legal status, gave your grandmother leverage in terms of her petition?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, he came from a very, very modest background, but he was a scholar, and he was a very, he knew everything by heart, partly because there was a curse and he wasn't allowed to write, so he ended up learning everything, and he was a master of Guinea. Actually, his first encounter with the emperor was through him, because he gave one of the Guinea at the coronation in 1930. And so, he was Alec Al-Batha, but he was also Likakana, so of the whole. So he was quite well connected. He was very, it absolutely did. Even in as in any other place, really no counts. And he did eventually because of his job. I mean, actually, one other point, which actually comes up because often I've been doing a few festivals and I end up talking to a lot of people who don't know anything at all about Ethiopia. And actually, one of the things I realised that I wanted to do in writing this book was to try and give as vivid a picture of Ethiopia in that time. Not now, I mean, it sort of ends in the 80s, but I wanted to give as vivid a picture of that Ethiopia as possible to an audience that often knows either nothing or makes assumptions largely coloured by what the other them. But so I wanted to try and make that as present as possible. So thank you.
Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived? Do you know who Haile Selassie is? Do you know what Haile Selassie did? Do you know where Haile Selassie lived?